Because education has finally reached a widespread status, the pointlessness of schools became a popular stance. Since online classes became a reality, it was argued that spending time in actual classrooms was a waste of time and resources. In the end, the pointlessness of schools only remained at the popular level and did not rise any higher. No matter how advanced the interface, virtual experiences are not reality. Practice and experimentation must be paired with timely questions and answers. In addition, anything not conducted under real circumstances will not yield actual learning experiences. Students learning together in the same class can promote additional learning. These 2 points have been proven beyond doubt by mock experiments. First-year Class E was in the middle of a practice class. Having said that, there wasn't a real-time teacher present. This is a simple example of when the results of research are not put into practice. The students of Class E were following the instructions displayed upon the wall monitor to operate the built-in educational use CAD. Today's subject matter was the basic of the basics, which is the simple operation of this device. While officially a guided learning session, there was still an assignment to complete. Because there was no supervising teacher, the completion of the assignment reports became the only criterion for this class. Today's assignment was to use the CAD to direct a flatbed car from one end of its track to the other, to be repeated 3 times. Despite the lack of a reminder, it was a given that manual operation is strictly forbidden. Totsuya, how did the student council room feel? While waiting in line to use the CAD, Leo asked after poking Totsuya in the back. His face didn't reveal any ulterior motive. He was simply curious. Turned into an intriguing conversation. Intriguing. Erika, who was in front of Totsuya in the line, also turned around to ask. They asked me to join the Public Moral Committee. How could it suddenly turn out this way? Totsuya and Erika both tilted their head. Truth be told, the only way to describe it would be how could things turn out this way. You're right. It is pretty sudden. Leo also agreed that it was quite unexpected. But isn't it great to be scouted by the student council? Mizuki's opinion was different from the others. She stopped as she was on her way back to the end of the line to try the assignment again. Great. Isn't this merely a complimentary bundle for my little sister? All the same, Totsuya was unable to accept Mizuki's compliment. Erika smiled slightly when she saw Totsuya's suspicious and stubborn attitude. Well, let's stop with all that self-depreciation. So, what does the Public Moral Committee do anyway? After hearing Erika's question, Totsuya repeated what he heard from Aizawa. Hearing that, all 3 pairs of eyes widened. Quite the troublesome task. Leo sighed while Mizuki's expression became worried. If it's not safe, then… Erika-chan, what's wrong? Erika was extremely upset, though come to speak of it, since when did she become so enraged? Really, so impulsive? Her eyesight drifted. Speaking towards thin air, it looked like she was scolding someone who wasn't present. Erika-chan? Sorry. That really is going too far. Totsuya-kun, you're better off declining such a dangerous task. As that solemn expression turned into a mischievous smile, Erika's voice became noticeably brighter as she goaded him. It's still quite interesting. Why don't you accept, Totsuya? I'll cheer you on. Although it was understandable that Erika was joking to disguise what she said earlier, it appeared that she was still hiding something. But if you have to intervene in conflicts, won't you be the target of magical attacks as well? There was a reasonable guess as to who the impulsive one referred to. Yeah, and there will definitely be people who mistake good intentions for cold-blooded actions. Yet, the exact details behind those feelings remain a mystery. On the other hand, rather than letting those pretentious Course 1 students hog the limelight, don't you think it's better if Totsuya does it? Totsuya wasn't rash enough to join their conversation. Well, that might be true. Erika-chan, please don't think of it that way. If we don't want that to happen, isn't it better to not get into fights? But Mizuki, even if we don't plan on it, aren't there times where we have to put out fires? Like yesterday, for example. Well, there is a lot of suspicion and injustice in the world. We can't always expect a positive result if we concede all the time. Case in point, unconsciously Totsuya felt that it was about time for him to end this conversation before it led to dangerous territory. Erika, it's your turn. Sorry. At Totsuya's nudging, The slightly flustered Erika quickly assumed her position. Judging from her back, she was in a state of complete seriousness and was completely unaffected by the earlier conversation. It looks like she is the type that can effortlessly change from one mental state to the next. Despite an outwardly flighty appearance, her natural state is probably one of seriousness. Erika's back shook a little, probably because she took a deep breath. It happened in a second, although invisible to the naked eye. The fluctuations of the scions passed over Erika's back and could be seen in the form of a light that only magicians could perceive. This was a sign that the activation and subsequent invocation did not consume all scions, as the leftover scions created this scion light. Highly skilled magicians only leave behind small amounts of scion light, but for a high school first-year student, this was an acceptable level. When there are enough leftover scions, photon interference between scions result in a physical manifestation of light. An absence of scion light would denote excellent control over one's abilities. The flatbed car in front of the CAD shifted forward, then returned to its original position. This occurred 3 times. Yes. It was obvious that Erika was very pleased with the result, as could be seen from her clenched fist and the way she turned to look at Totsuya. Indeed, she was more deft this time compared to the first time they conducted this exercise, and there was marked improvement to both acceleration and deceleration. The purpose of this exercise was to accelerate the flatbed car to the middle of the track, then decelerate to the other end, accelerate from that end back towards the middle, and decelerate to the starting point. To be repeated 3 times. The activation sequence inputted into the CAD was for these 6 acceleration and deceleration invocations. Because there were no set acceleration or deceleration vectors, this could be used to examine the skill level amongst the students. Whether the flatbed car moved in a stable motion was enough to gauge if the user was skilled or not. Erika secretly displayed a hand signal for victory that was not snobbish at all as she moved towards the end of the line behind Mizuki. Next, Totsuya took his place before the built-in CAD. He stepped on the pedal switch to adjust the CAD height, placed his palm on the white, transparent touchpad that sat atop a large box, and began to manipulate the scion flow. What returned was the sound of the activation confirmation, intermixed with various conflicting noise. Resisting the urge to wrinkle his eyebrows, Totsuya began to build the invocation sequence. The flatbed car stumbled 2 or 3 times before moving forward in a stable motion. Because today's assignment was to get used to operating a CAD, there was no timer installed. Besides Totsuya himself, no one would know. Until the moment the flatbed car started moving, the time exhausted was greater than Erika's by a large margin. Actually, not just compared to Erika. Out of the 25 people in Class E, he would definitely be one of the bottom feeders. The only reason this was not immediately obvious was because the motion of the flatbed car was roughly the same as the others. However, Totsuya was well aware of his own disappointing performance. Thank God no one was jealous. Despite the series of good luck Tilda calls from his friends, his mood did not improve, and instead was even more depressed. The reason was probably because Totsuya originally was not interested in the subject, thus leading to his further depression. After school, Totsuya headed towards the student council room, dragging even heavier footsteps than during lunch break. Although the atmosphere surrounding the circumstances was a little pitiful, because Miyuki could understand Totsuya's feelings, she remained silent. Thanks to the fact that the ID card was already registered in the certification system, joining the student council is apparently considered a guarantee. Although resistance is possible, Mayumi and Marie would probably insist. The siblings entered the room. Immediately upon entering, there was a sharp gaze tinged with hostility. The source came from the opposite side of the machine in the wall, in a seat that was unoccupied during lunch break. Excuse us. It was hard to say whether it was out of sorrow or pride, but Totsuya was already accustomed to this type of gaze and atmosphere. He maintained his poker face, bowed in silence, and with that the hostile gaze dissipated like rain clouds before the sun. Even then, it wasn't as if the hostility had disappeared completely, more like the previous hostile gaze was now directed in a more favorable light towards Miyuki, who was now standing in the front. The reasoning behind this should need no further explanation. The owner of this gaze stood up and walked towards the siblings. No, more like walked towards Miyuki. Totsuya remembered his face. On the day of enrollment, He was the second-year student standing closely behind Mayumi as if awaiting orders, thus making him the student council vice president. The vice president stood roughly as tall as Tatsuya. The difference was that his shoulders were a little narrower. He had a handsome visage that did not warrant additional words to describe, and an unremarkable build. He did not give off a robust impression, but from the way scion light densely clung to the air around his body, he must be a young man with considerable magic power. I am the vice president, Hattori Gyubu. Shiba Miyuki, welcome to the student council. His voice was a little abnormal, but considering his age he was probably suppressing any personal reaction. His right hand shook a little, probably because the wish to shake hands was not completely erased. As to why the shaking stopped, Tatsuya did not care to consider. Hattori returned to his seat while completely ignoring Tatsuya. Behind Miyuki, a displeased aura was gathering, but that too disappeared in an instant. The only one who noticed was probably Tatsuya, thanks to his proximity. Thankfully she managed to control herself. Tatsuya patted himself discreetly on the chest. The vice president was completely unaware of Tatsuya's worries, though that shouldn't be surprising, given they just met or the source of Tatsuya's worries. Just then, two very casual greetings flew in. Ah, you're here. Welcome, Miyuki. You too, Tatsuya-kun. Good work. From the way Marie casually raised a hand in greeting, she was already treating Tatsuya as one of them. Mayumi was the complete opposite. Her attitude was much different from before. Then again, most groups would be upset if an outsider were to intrude, although no outburst actually happened. Tatsuya, much like everyone else, had long since arrived at the conclusion that trying to understand these two was a hopeless cause. In that case, no need to delay. A-chan, if you please. Yes. It appeared that she already gave up. For a moment, Aizawa's head drooped with a sad expression before she put on a wooden smile and led Miyuki towards the terminal on the side. Well, let's be off. It hasn't even been a whole day yet and she's already speaking so casually. Maybe flightiness is part of her character, Tatsuya thought. Where to? Then again, Tatsuya's background was not privileged enough for him to care about anyone else's word choice. He replied in the shortest, most efficient method possible. Public Moral Committee Headquarters. There's a lot of things you need to see firsthand to understand. It's located directly underneath this room. That being said, they're both connected. After Marie finished speaking, Tatsuya took a breath before replying. That's quite the strange design. I thought so too. As she was saying this, Marie began to stand up. But just as she was about to leave the chair, a comment stopped her. Watanabe-senpai, please wait a minute. The voice came from Vice President Hattori. Upon hearing this, Marie replied in a manner that to this day Tatsuya still cannot get used to. Is something the matter, Hattori Gyubashuju Hanzu? Please don't address me by my full name. Tatsuya glanced at Mayumi. Seeing Tatsuya's gaze, Mayumi tilted her head with a "Hm? You're telling me that Hanzu is actually his real name? Completely unexpected. Then let's go with Vice President Hattori Hanzu. Please call me Hattori Gyubu. That's your family's official title, isn't it? It has nothing to do with the title now. The school has already accepted the name Hattori Gyubu. No, that's not what I wanted to say. That's because you're too formal, isn't it? Okay, Marie. Hanzu also has things he won't back down from. Everyone's gaze fell towards the speaker. Mayumi, you're hardly qualified to say that. But Mayumi had no reaction at all, probably because she didn't realize it. More to the point, why hadn't Hattori said anything? This was slightly different than not being accustomed to speaking with the president. Even when confronting Marie, Hattori's expression had not changed. But compared to his expression then, Tatsuya found that to be very interesting. Of course, that was only under the condition that he was a spectator. Alas, the time allotted to a spectator is very short. Watanabe-senpai, the topic I wanted to speak with you about is precisely regarding the replacements for the Public Moral Committee. The blood that had originally caused Hattori's face to flush completely red had now receded. Just like the slow-motion screening for an animation, Hattori had calmed himself. What? I object to you appointing this first-year student to the Public Moral Committee. When Hattori stated his opinion, he was either perfectly calm, or was forcibly holding his emotions in check. Marie's eyebrows wrinkled slightly, and that did not appear to be an act. Tatsuya couldn't tell if she was merely surprised or irritated by this. What is this nonsense? The one who nominated Shiba Tatsuya-kun is President Sigusa. Even though it was verbal, the right of appointment remains with her alone. I have heard that the receiving party has not agreed. Despite the nomination, the matter is unofficial until he personally agrees. That is up to Shiba Tatsuya-kun himself. The president has already elaborated on the decision of the student council. The final decision is his, not yours. Marie's eyes were on Hattori while she said this. Hattori never looked at Tatsuya. Or maybe it would be more correct to say that he was ignoring Tatsuya's presence. Watching these two people, Suzune was very calm, Aizawa was very nervous, and Mayumi was completely unreadable, sitting there with a traditional smile on her face. Miyuki was staring at the terminal on the side with a subtle expression on her face. However, she was probably a hair trigger away from exploding at any time. For entirely different reasons, both Tatsuya and Aizawa were growing very worried. There is no precedence for appointing a weed to the Public Moral Committee. Hattori's rebuttal was laced with the derogatory term. Upon hearing this, Marie slightly raised an eyebrow. That's a taboo term, Vice President Hattori. A taboo term as banned by the Public Moral Committee. You have a lot of nerve using that in front of me, the chair of the Public Moral Committee. Facing Marie's reprimand, warning, or maybe a little of both, Hattori showed no sign of weakness. You can ban that term all you want. Do you plan on punishing a third of the entire student body? The difference between blooms and weeds is something that is written into the school system and acknowledged by the school itself. The source of the difference between blooms and weeds is the difference in ability. Public Moral Committee members are responsible for the task of subjugating students that break school rules. A weed with inferior abilities is incapable of accomplishing that task. To Hattori's proud assertion, Marie only smiled coldly. It is true that the Public Moral Committee is ability-based, but ability comes in many forms. If we need to use strength for suppression, that's what I'm here for. Even if I'm up against 10 or even 20 opponents, I can handle them alone. In this school, the only people that can go one-on-one against me are President Sigusa and Club Management Group Leader Jumanji. According to you, the people with low combat capability are unnecessary. So, do you plan to challenge me, Vice President Hattori? The only way that Marie would say this was because of her confidence and combat record. However, despite slightly backing down before this enormous pressure, Hattori had no plans to surrender. This isn't my problem. It's about his ability to adapt. The bottom line was that Hattori believed his stance was correct. Course 2 students with inferior abilities could not handle the responsibilities of the Public Moral Committee that were so heavily reliant on ability. The fact that no Course 2 student had ever been appointed to the Public Moral Committee also supported this. In spite of this, Marie's confidence surpassed Hattori. Did I not say that ability comes in many forms? Tatsuya-kun can read the activation sequence and thus accurately predict the magic being invoked with his eyes and brain. What did you say? Upon hearing this unexpected detail, Hattori reflexively asked. Rather than saying this was unexpected, it would be more appropriate to say this was impossible to believe. Reading the activation sequence. This by all rights should be impossible. For Hattori, that was common sense. In other words, even before the magic has been invoked, he already knows what magic his opponent is using. However, Marie's answer did not change. This was the truth, was definitely possible, and Marie had no doubts whatsoever as she said it. According to our school rules, depending on the type of magic used, the level of punishment also changes. Unfortunately, if we were to disrupt the activation sequence before invocation like Mayumi did, there is no way to tell what magic was originally used. If we waited until the activation sequence finished, then that would defeat the entire purpose. Thus it is safer to disrupt magic during the activation sequence. Without any definite accusation of wrongdoing, the only thing we can charge them with is attempted disruption and the subsequent lighter punishment. But with Tatsuya, we can properly catch those that have been using stronger magics. But, if he ran across an actual crime scene, and was unable to stop the magic invocation, Hattori could not overcome his shock, but still managed to rebut. In that case, it would be beyond a first-year Course 1 student anyways. And probably beyond second-year students as well. How many people do you know that are able to invoke second and still manage to deny their opponent from invoking first? Besides that, there is still one more reason I want him to join the Public Moral Committee. Marie tabled the first reason and started another. No matter what, Hattori couldn't come up with a counter-argument on the spot. To this day, there is no Public Moral Committee member that comes from Course 2 students. In other words, Course 2 students that improperly use magic against school rules are apprehended by Course 1 students. As you said, there is a wide divide between Course 1 and Course 2 students. Course 1 students can apprehend Course 2 students, but the reverse is not true. This configuration has only served to widen that divide. I do not like it that the committee members under my command are only serving to widen this differential impression. Ah! Quite impressive, Marie. You have even taken this into account. I thought you only cared about Totsuya-kun. Please be quiet, President. Mayumi wanted to change the surrounding atmosphere, but was stopped by Suzune. A reproachful look, a shaking head. The former was from Mayumi, the latter from Suzune, and so, two conflicting emotions were mixed together into one inseparable whole, and came bursting out with resentment. President, as the Vice President, I object to appointing Shiba Totsuya as a Public Morals Committee member. While I accept that Chair Watanabe has got a point in her assertion, the original mission of a Public Morals Committee member is to uncover and subjugate the school rule breakers. A Course 2 student who is lacking in magic ability can't perform the duties of a Public Morals Committee member. Such a misplaced appointment will surely damage your reputation as the president. Please reconsider. Please wait. Totsuya turned around frantically. Just as he had feared, Miyuki could no longer bear with it. Absorbed in Marie's speech, he had missed the right timing to restrain her. While he frantically attempted to preemptively stop her, Miyuki, who had started speaking, was faster. This may sound audacious, Vice President. My brother's practical magic results may indeed be unfavorable, but that was merely because the practical test was not effective in gauging my brother's strength. In a real battle, my brother would not lose to anyone. On hearing those words that were filled with certainty, Marie's eyes widened a little. Mayumi's faint smile disappeared as well, and her serious eyes turned towards Miyuki and Totsuya. However, the seriousness in the gaze Hattori returned on Miyuki became thinner. Shiba-san. The one Hattori was addressing was, needless to say, Miyuki. Regardless of what happens, a magician must make judgments calmly and logically. Individual bias may be unavoidable for a normal person, but for one who is aiming to become a magician, please bear in mind that you should not let your individual bias cloud your judgment. There was no kindness felt in the admonishment. He was probably just acting as an excellent upperclassman, who despite his self-righteousness, was looking after his junior of the same Course 1. But, under these circumstances, Totsuya seemed to know that such a manner of speaking would cause an opposite effect, and the moment when Miyuki would rebuke Hattori. Sure enough, Miyuki was getting increasingly heated up. Pardon me for saying so, but my judgment is not clouded. If only Isama could use more of his power. Miyuki. Totsuya held his hand out in front of Miyuki, who had completely lost her cool. With a startled face, Miyuki shut her mouth with a mix of embarrassment and regret, and hung her head in shame. Having stopped Miyuki's words with a wave of his hand, Totsuya walked up to Hattori. Miyuki had indeed said too much. She had almost said the things that shouldn't be said. However, it was Hattori who had made Miyuki say that much. Totsuya had no intention of putting all the blame on Miyuki alone. Vice President Hattori, why don't we have a mock battle? What? The people who were lost for words from the surprise request were not limited to the challengee, Hattori, alone. Mayumi, and also Marie, looked at the two of them in dumbfounded amazement from the unexpected daring retaliation. Under everyone's gaze, Hattori's body started quivering. Don't be too conceited, for a mere reserve. The one who gave a small shriek was Aizawa. The other three, as expected of upperclassmen, remained composed. And then, a small wry smile surfaced on the troubled face of the one who was getting verbally abused. What's so funny? A magician should remain calm, right? Having his own words thrown back at him in ridicule, Hattori held his breath. Totsuya didn't stop there. He did not feel like stopping. As it is, I think that we won't know each other's anti-personnel battle skill without fighting. It's not like I want to become a public morals committee member, but if it's for proving that my little sister's judgment is not clouded, then it cannot be helped." He seemed to be mumbling to himself. To Hattori, it sounded like a challenge. "Fine. I'll give you a good lesson on what it is to know your place." It was not just his mouth that had betrayed his agitation. His controlled tone, on the contrary, indicated the depth of his anger. Without a moment's delay, Mayumi interjected. "As the student council president, I authorize the formal mock battle match between second-year Class B, Hattori Gyubu, and first-year Class E, Shiba Totsuya. On the basis of the student council president's declaration, as the chair of Public Morals Committee, I recognize that the match between the two of you as a legitimate extracurricular activity in abidance of the school rules. The time of the match will be 30 minutes from now, at the third practice room. The match will be a private one, and I authorize the use of CADs by both sides." It was a measure to prevent the match from becoming a brawling incident, an act of violence forbidden by the school rules. On the declaration from Mayumi and Marie with solemn expressions and nonchalant voices, Aizawa started typing furiously into the terminal.